Okay, we are live. Kia ora everybody, welcome to round 5 of the NZIER Nationals 2021. The motion today is this House regrets the popularity of the girl boss narrative. And on the affirmative, we have Bay of Plenty, and on the negating, we have CNI. Bay of Plenty, could you please go through your speakers, state your name and your preferred gender pronouns if you would like to.
I'm Arcadia, first speaker, and my pronouns she, her.
Travis, second speaker, Ethan.
Cool. And CNI, you could do the same, please.
I'm Leah, she.
Awesome.
Bridget, she, her.
John, Ethan.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Could I get the adjudicators to do the same, please?
My name's Sarah, and I usually could pronounce
Awesome. And for the sake of morale today, we've also been asked to get you guys to introduce your mascots. So if you could tell us their names and a brief description of what they look like. Bay of Plenty.
We have Remy the Rat from Ratatouille.
Beautiful.
And he, I really represents the colonial Gen Z. And really represents like our TikTok musical abilities as a house. So we think he's iconic for the best.
I thought he's on like a ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean somewhere. So.
Yeah, okay, take a little holiday.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. And CNI, your mascot.
Mongrel Monroe. He was the closest thing to the Lawrence we could find, and Ellis was only one.
Okay. Thank you guys very much. Just a reminder to people on the live stream, the motion is this House regrets the popularity of girl boss narratives. And if that's all, I'd like to welcome up the first ACT speaker from Bay of Plenty, Arcadia.
The feminist movement was created to empower women across the world to break the barriers of privilege, sexism, and misogyny in our social and societal power structures, to change the course of thousands of years of segregation and oppression. The girl boss movement actively undermines this by coercing women into positions where they are promised power, then stripped of any power they actually have. Today, we bring you 3 key reasons our house strongly rejects the rising popularity of the girl boss term. Firstly, girl boss narratives manipulate vulnerable women to join MLMs. Secondly, how this harms the feminist movement. And our second speaker will elaborate on our third point. Thirdly, this puts dangerous pressure on women. So what we're going to do today is prove to you that the girl boss movement has harmed women and the feminist movement worldwide as a whole. We define the girl boss movement as a societal narrative that strongly encourages women to pursue financial and business success as a feminist act. We define MLMs, in other words, multi-level marketings, and you could probably go as far to say pyramid schemes, as organizations that use these members and women to sell products and to recruit a set number of people. Girl bosses used by MLM leaders and recruiters encourage women to join and feel powerful. Women in desperate situations, for example, divorce, poverty, and parenthood, feel that this is an adequate way to succeed, but in reality, it's plunged into debt, despair, and prosperity. Not prosperity, poverty. Moving to our first point, that girl boss narratives manipulate women into joining MLMs and taking other risky financial business practices, not just MLMs, but this is often women who do this, because the girl boss term was coined back in the early 2000s by white, rich women who started running, and many continue to run, MLMs. They are straight up pyramid schemes that deliberately seek out vulnerable women, promises of wealth and success. We've seen this in MLMs like Unique, Herbalife, and Lulu Rose, ones we've all heard of and know how this has harmed women and have called themselves girl bosses. There's a reason why around 96% of women in MLMs are women. We bring you 5 key reasons for why and how vulnerable women are deliberately being targeted and harmed by the girl boss movement. Firstly, girl Girl bosses capitalize on the sexism in the workplace and business today and use it as a way to coerce women into calling themselves girl bosses and joining MLMs. Girl bosses know the struggles for women to get opportunity, authority, and financial leverage, and importantly, respect. The rich white women running MLMs, calling their slaves, employees, girl bosses. They preach with emotive speeches and heartfelt stories of women being oppressed, particularly in the workplace, and promise if they join the MLM, that they can be their own boss, a girl boss, and will succeed and gain respect from their male peers. But these are deliberately manipulative tactics that just don't follow through on their promises, leading to my second mechanism, that it manipulates women with financial promises that just don't happen. Companies like Lulu Rose, Unique, and Herbalife get women to buy resource packs and sell these products to their friends and family. And I tell you that if you sell enough product, you can make a level to get luxury holiday benefits. However, we see many women going into debt because they sell their cheap and often dangerous products like makeup that literally have court cases out because they burn people's skin. These are the women that call themselves girl bosses, but also because they're not giving any real advice on help in how to succeed in business. There's so many documentaries of women crying as they tell the stories of how they're promised success from these so-called girl bosses, and behind them is a room full of unsold and poorly made products that just weren't selling because they would tell the products, don't have any business experiences, they weren't given any help, and they were blinded by the powerful girl boss label and able to feel like they had grasp power in a misogynistic world, and this just simply was not the case. Thirdly, it manipulates women into blaming them that they don't succeed because they just weren't trying hard enough. Even when they risk everything to try and succeed and be their own girl boss. They end up losing valuable relationships like friends and family because they were blinded by the desperation to sell products and become a girl boss, their own boss, at their own business when they aren't actually owning their business. It's the ones at the top of the MLM that are benefiting. It's the rich white women that are saying, I'm a girl boss, you come join, be my girl boss. They're like Oprah, they're throwing out money when actually they're throwing nothing at you. They're telling you, because, as I've explained before, because of misogyny in the workplace, women want to get a foot on. We want women in the workplace to be businesses and successful, but this just isn't the case with the women calling themselves girl bosses. There's a reason so many big business women are not calling themselves girl bosses, because they know that this is a damaging term, which our next speakers will also tell you more about. So, for our second point, about how this directly harms the feminist movement. The girl boss narrative labels successful women as particularly businesswomen and shoves them under the girl boss umbrella, often without their consent or knowledge of the term. This strips away their unique and individual merits and discounts their struggles as women in male-dominated industries like business and like law, often meaning they are patronized by men and taken less seriously as women in traditionally male roles. When women genuinely succeed, their achievements are minimized by their girl boss label. Even when this label is well-meaning, it enables big corporate structures to be engaging in performative feminism by congratulating women for being a girl boss, but not actually giving them a platform to share their individual struggles and processes. This is really harmful to the feminist movement because there is no genuine progress made for women, and women are not taken seriously in their successes as they should be in their corporate structures, because calling women girl bosses counts as feminism. It enables greater oppression and no further effort to be made by women to excel in their careers. Now, before I continue, I'll take you a while.
Don't you suppose that when companies use this for performative activism, when you're actually doing performative activism, they might not have good intentions, but you don't suppose that it can actually do tangible benefits?
I'm kind of confused by the way, because you say performative activism is a good thing. Feminism is all about having tangible benefits, and yes, the intentions are bad, and this also leads to tangibly bad outcomes. It's not just, they had, very bad intentions and created these MLMs that actually benefited people. No, they intentionally harm. We see women going to debt, and people are embarrassed because they're like, I used to be, I guess, a girl boss. And it's horrific that women are being manipulated by this, and we're actually not giving enough women credit for their own unique benefit, for their unique merits in the business world today, by forcing them onto this category, even if they don't want to be. Continuing from my point about how this harms the feminist movement, feminism is about women joining together and overcoming power structures. The girl boss movement pits women against each other because they must compete for success. Women incorporate common for good and not exclusively self-success. No woman can actually succeed, despite the odds, call themselves when they're called girl bosses. Jacinta Ardern, Teresa Gatling, and Deborah Meaden don't call themselves girl bosses because they know this is a terrible term. And they're very successful women in the business field, and they know this term is dangerous because it gives women false hope. And this is just not what we stand for. This is a patronizing term that strips them of their personal merit. It actively harms feminism movement, and it puts women in debt, cuts off their relationships, and ultimately just does not give them a better life. We do not stand for this. Proud to affirm.
I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech, and will now welcome up the first negating speaker, Mia.
When Side F distilled empowerment into manipulation and pyramid schemes because somehow every woman felt the need to do this herself, or that Girl Boss was a marketing scheme for luxury holidays and makeup products, we tell you that they've completely ignored the nuances of female empowerment and the way in which Girl Boss operates to provide a cohesive network, training opportunities, business camps, coding programs, etc., to give women an opportunity that they've been denied for so long and was never going to be given to them by these businesses in the first place. We can't stand for a world in which we should ever have to compromise this, because somehow this destroys a meritocracy which simply doesn't exist in a heavily misogynistic society. 3 substantives in our debate today. Firstly, why the Girl Boss movement is great for accessibility and cogent empowerment. Secondly, how we strengthen feminist ideals in the workplace. And then the split approach that second on how we help to educate male-dominated workforce. I'd like to make 4 main points of rebuttal to begin with. So firstly, we have this characterization that Girl Boss operates on pyramid schemes. I think that telling women that they can pursue computer science and go into the tech industry isn't pushing people into poverty, it's bringing people up. Because we can't give females a hand in the workplace if no one is doing this. We think it's really important to know that businesses don't currently have an incentive just because of the entrenched power structures that we're really happy to tell you. So many business offices don't offer secular training streams in coding or extensive networking opportunities, which Girl Boss does. It's about providing an opportunity that has been denied. We think it's really dangerous when they just assume that this is likely to happen anyway. But secondly, on manipulating women who are trying hard enough. So we think that this is just completely mischaracterized actually what Girl Boss is. I'll talk about this later. But basically, Girl Boss runs on a really extensive online network. It's connecting females across against who maybe aren't bought into certain feminist ideals, e.g. quotas in the workforce. What they can all broadly agree on is that feminism should be employed in the workforce and that we should be given equal opportunity. What this does is it tells women that it's not a money-making scheme. It's about getting a leg up, and it's about pushing the support that when you don't get that promotion, that you can try again because there are people there to support you and be with you. On this whole point of being not taken seriously, we think it's like very, very utopian for Side F to just say that meritocracy is a great idea. Like, maybe that's true, but just in society, that's just not how it works. We tell you that like if opportunities aren't being provided to get equality, we need to do more than just supporting the status quo. If that looks like providing like particular networks for females to get into, we think that's really important because the other side of this argument is no opportunity at all.
What definition?
Then just fourthly on competition, we just think like it's not woman versus woman. That's just completely like goes against the entire feminist movement itself. We tell you it's literally feminist, like women competing for an opportunity in a misogynistic society. It's not this like female versus female or female versus male. It's females coming together and literally like educating their male counterparts. It's literally females starting STEM clubs in their schools. That's what gets you cohesion, not competition. So let's look into my first substantive point, how the girl boss movement is great for accessibility and coaching empowerment. Because the girl boss movement, we've predominantly seen its presence online. To see so many infographics, Instagram pages, and TikToks dedicated to the movement. That's really, really important for grassroots level change and support for 3 reasons. First of all, we think it's a very simplified modern platform for the feminist movement because not everyone has access to the archaic language or a form of really dense feminist ideals. For young girls, it's far easier to find girl boss narratives because that's visible, attractive, and more palatable. Because being a hashtag girl boss and having things knowing that you can thrive in your workplace, that's far more easy for a young, uneducated girl to digest who just gets bogged down by like the banner of feminist ideals of rape culture, pay gap. That's really important, but it's often got an unclear structural group for people to adopt and feel empowered by. Secondly, with the online movement, this meant that far more girls have been able to directly see the widespread influence of the girl boss movement. We think that's far easier for so many more women to feel empowered by seeing girls in STEM-dominated workplaces on their Instagram pages having a breakthrough than waiting years and years for regulation to be passed. We think that's also important, but to actually get this legislative change, you need to get the short-term support and the buy-in to actually feel like what you're doing is gaining traction. We tell the girl boss movement is so important for visibility, to keep the momentum for the feminist movement, to actually gain enthusiasm and hope for legislative change. We tell that the girl boss movement gains the trajectory of the feminist movement and buoyancy that we need for long-term change. Thirdly, we take that girl boss spans secular business training movements because a lot of feminist movement, as I told you, are very polarized internally. Not everyone who's a feminist agrees with quotas, not everyone agrees with female choice conversations. We tell you that it's far more likely to unite women under these feminist ideals and the girl boss tenets rather than people just being completely divided. It's a far more cogent strength for people to feel adopted and recognized by. We tell that women in New York or Australia may not agree on these quotas, but we tell that we could have and should have a sort of pursuit of success in the workforce with equal opportunity. That's really important to unite internally a movement with multiple facets under one broadly acceptable notion. What are the impacts of this? Firstly, you get more individuals able to access and join the movement. Because when you're a young girl and things like comprehensive feminist policy like probably confuse you, saying that you're a girl boss on social media or on networks with literally thousands of other girls that want to initiate STEM classes in your primary or intermediate school has far more of a tangible impact. We take that's what gets the feminist movement to be successful when you get the sustainability of the young people having mass support, acting as a gateway into the feminist movement. Secondly, we uplift young people because the girl boss is a very tangible movement. That's really important to keep the morale of the feminist movement going, to get the long-term change we talked to you about. Because people are far more likely to trust in the success of the movement and push the ideals when they know it has a widespread impact, when they know that it can get recognized. To actually get comprehensive policy ideals in the long term, you need faith and support. That's what happens under the girl boss. Really important as a gateway. I'll take your view.
Can you give us a single example of someone who calls themselves a girl boss who are running profiting off a multi-level marketing scheme made up of vulnerable women?
Okay, yeah, we literally tell you there's a really powerful girl boss movement in New Zealand that literally operates off like non-profit funds. What it does is it goes into like low decile schools, runs coding and training program schemes. It reaches out to businesses to give free internships to people. We tell like this whole policy pyramid scheme. Like if we see a really strong girl boss movement doing that, you're probably going to get a lot of mass media attention that's really helpful to the feminist workplace. We just tell you that girl boss movements don't want to directly undermine the feminist movement. So within that, we tell you that it's really, really important that in order to get long-term change, we get short-term buoyancy and support. We're just going to tell you not only how we get change within the workforce, but we tell you that when we get grassroots real change within the young children, but then just one woman, know that they have the support and training necessary by masses of online people and support, giving them constant feedback, giving them empowerment and self-confidence to speak out at a business board meeting, to make that one initiative that maybe they were too scared to do. That agency, that action is really, really important to combat the misogyny that they feel that they've been pressed by, or tell their daughter that a workplace can change. Because what we tell you is when Girl Boss gives you a visible, tangible support, for even just one woman or one young child to feel important by, that's not lost amidst the den of extraneous feminist ideals and visible networks, there's a far better world that we're happy to stand for.
Starbucks, Mountain Bars, what's next?
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and will now welcome up the second speaker from Bay of Plenty, Travis.
What does women in business and success actually look like? On the outside of the house, we see women being successful and feminism as real and tangible ways of getting women succeeding and going above the power structures. This involves getting them interested in subjects like STEM and arts instead of traditional things like home economics. Not through by saying that they will be a boss in a business in the future, but by saying, we think you'll be good at this and we think you'll be great. In the past, we have seen schools and educational institutions say that you're a girl, you're not suited for this. This is where feminism makes the change. Not saying that they can manage their own company. Look, under their side of the house, Girl Boss looks like saying, hey, you're going to run this company, you're going to be amazing, you're going to make all of this money. What we see in reality is this makes girls feel that the only way they can be empowered is through being an entrepreneur. We've spoken about this in first, and I'll explain a little bit more in my split about how this actually puts a dangerous pressure on people. Look, in my speech today, first of all, I'm going to respond to the points and some of the rebuttals they've given us, and secondly, I'm going to deliver my speech, my split of why this puts a dangerous pressure. Yes, I'll take the POI. Why this puts a dangerous pressure on girls. Right. They told us in their case that the Girl Boss movement is making feminism more accessible and that this promotes feminist ideals. But before I begin, they've tried to give us some rebuttals about pyramid schemes and manipulation and that kind of stuff. First of all, they say that Girl Boss is not limited to pyramid schemes. We have said really clearly that we have really never seen Girl Boss promoted in the way we've characterised it first in any place other than pyramid schemes. You see online with marketing like you have Huns, you can, if you've heard the term, oh, you can be your own boss, you can manage your own self. Not only is it patronising based on the term, but it's also really common there. We don't see that in science classrooms. We don't see that in any place where it would actually make a tangible difference. We also said at first that the kind of people who have been successful, Jacinda Ardern, Theresa Gunning, and Deborah Meaden, do not use those terms, and nobody refers to that. In fact, they've actually said that they hate it for the reasons we don't like that term. Look, they also say that we oppose meritocracy and all that kind of stuff. We've never said that in our first speech. We actually said that we need respectful ways of getting women into business and those kinds of things, and the ways of doing that is by opening those doors and making it accessible. Look, being successful for women is not just about running businesses. In the same way being successful about men is not just running businesses. Girl Boss implies specifically in the definition of the name itself that you are a boss of your own business. And the only way that is marketed to women is through multi-level marketing schemes. Success actually looks like being scientists, being doctors, being lawyers, being teachers, being nurses, and all of those kinds of things that girls want to see in their passions. And that is why it's incompatible with their idea of feminism. Right, now, the first point they deliver us is some kind of talk about accessibility. They say that accessibility is better through infographics and in the workplace. On the topic of infographics, yes, they are right that we can see more feminist infographics in display across the social media sphere. And they are right to say that actually, yes.
How does your side of the house uplift women and give opportunities for women in any way that we don't?
Yes, I can explain that. Basically, those infographics show women actually relating issues to work issues that affect women. On our side of the house, we see feminism as something that is serious, not to do with girl bosses, but to do with getting women the issues that face them in the front page and by raising awareness of that. That happens in infographics because the infographics are often about things like sexual assault, which is a real issue. For example, recently there's been a huge push about how it's affecting women, gender pay gaps, and inequalities in education. Nowhere do you see girl boss as prevalent in these kinds of things as the negating side claims. It is simply a mischaracterization of reality. And they also say that girl boss is prevalent in the workplace. We tell you that in the workplace and the school place, feminist things are taught about sensitivity training and making sure that people get rid of the mindsets that women cannot succeed. Girl boss is a very limited and very popular way of seeing it, and that's why we tell you that the accessibility is not true. But even if you were to believe their argument that accessibility is true, we tell you this actually creates more harms. Because if we have more accessibility and more people saying, you can be a girl boss, this is great, we exacerbate the harms on our side because it puts an unnecessary pressure, as I'll get into my speech. No. They've also said that this promotes feminist ideals. We don't really understand that because there wasn't a whole lot of detail on that point, but I will talk on it briefly. What are feminist ideals? Feminism is about equality and equity. It's about making sure that women and men have the same opportunities. And it also broadly extends to minorities and making sure that they are doing well. Look, we have seen in the history of feminism about making sure that the societal structures are broken down. We've not seen women patronized by this movement by saying, we want you to be bosses, we want you to be amazing. The feminist movement, as we have seen through Kate Shepherd and voting rights and through feminism in the 1970s, that women need to have the same opportunities as men. This is why we don't have a man boss movement, because unfortunately, people are not manipulated men the same way, and this is actually really dangerous to women. Right, on to my split point. Look, this puts dangerous pressure on women. In pop culture, TV shows, and movies, women are often portrayed as powerful and positioned. Now, this is good, we tell you, but unfortunately the girl boss movement capitalizes on this and says that they're only successful and they're only powerful because they have been entrepreneurs and business people. Look, people involved in these organisations that, like MLMs, are basically led to believe that the only way to be successful is by being an entrepreneur. And they're also forced to tell the other people because they need to market more people on what's called their downline, or people or marketing people below them to have more people. What they do to do that is by repeating and extending this narrative to all other people. Look, we tell you that this narrative gets extremely pushy, and a lot of women are saturated by it. And because of the prevalence in social spheres and in the media and online sometimes, they believe that this really is the only way to success. But this works in two ways for unnecessary pressure on women. Firstly, we've explained in our first slide, extend on this more, women feel that their only path to success is to be an entrepreneur. They become saturated with the notion that the only place to succeed is in business and not in lower level jobs, for example, working for other people or working in other institutions, such as nursing and teaching and the other things. Instead of working to make meaningful change through innovation in science, and they tell us that, by the way, they tell us that STEM is involved in this, but we tell you that these programs are rarely seen in schools, and in fact, STEM for women is a respectful thing that opens opportunities in creative spaces. Look, we tell you that actually, instead of being encouraged to innovate and change the law, which the feminism movement really is about and has been doing, they're encouraged to sell pants and face washes, for example, through LuLaRoe and Herbalife. This is not changing the world. This is selling products that anyone can buy at a supermarket. Look, this creates pressure because they feel they need to give up their interests and ambitions to sell clothes. They cannot promote what they want to do. And unfortunately, this is becoming too saturated in society. This creates unnecessary pressure secondly because it means that it makes women who feel that they have failed their failure is their own fault. Instead of blaming the systemic issues with multi-level marketing firms that mean that they fail because they cannot get enough supply to pay back the stock that they buy, they believe that they have not worked hard enough to achieve success. They do not believe that they have been screwed over by a malicious organisation, but instead they think they need to work hard. This has three key outcomes. Firstly, it makes a lot of women feel depressed and anxious because they feel like they're not good enough. Secondly, it makes a lot of the targets of MLMs, housewives, even more, makes mental issues in them even worse than they are now. We know that housewives and those kinds of people already have serious mental issues and rely on medication, and this is a bad thing. It also creates a cycle of abuse where women feel they need to go back into the MLMs and do more to do better, and this makes it worse. Look, we tell you at the end of this point, the girl boss movement has only harmed women and has created unnecessary pressure, and this has got real and long-standing side effects regardless of that.
I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech. We're just going to take a brief 30-second pause. Just to reset the lights in this room for the live stream. Sometimes the lights turn off, and we don't want them to crash anyone's speech. So. Thank you. Awesome. I'd now like to welcome up the second speaker from Central North Island, Bridget.
To utilise social media means we educate a huge number of the population about social justice. I will further develop how the rise of the girl boss narrative helps to educate male-dominated workforces. So first, I found two areas of clash. The first was kind of the effect on women, and the second was how it is in the feminist movement as a whole. So they kind of came out and said that they use this to capitalize on sexist workforce. But when we said when women feel empowered to enter an already stable workforce, for example, say an already stable workforce use this girl boss narrative, then that's that is male dominated. It actually pushes this stereotype more than anything. And they talked about how it pits women against each other. Well, we said in our first speaker that it actually doesn't, because women are pitted against men more than they are pitted against themselves, right? Especially when we're talking about a workforce area. A girl boss is it's a section of feminism. They're just for the workforce. It's prevalent in the workforce. So when we don't encourage what the manipulative schemes that you came up with. And so when we're talking about that, it's this, what you provided is illegal. When you are lying about what you were selling, that's illegal, and that's obviously not going to be promoted by anyone. So that's just not we kind of see this as just obviously not what we support. And when someone's going out with this illegal stuff, we don't see this as the actual girl boss narrative. This is just people, it's illegal. We can kind of reiterate that. And so they talked about how they would only feel empowered, this only pushes into and feels empowered as a CEO. But we push this as owning your own future, being the boss of your own life. You're the boss. This isn't the boss of being a workforce. It's feeling empowered and supported. And nothing, it just has nothing, yes, okay, maybe at their worst, if we take it as that, how is it so bad that we're pushing women to be CEOs? Why is that such a big deal? We're pushing women to be at the top. Why is that not a goal? And so they kind of talk about man boss a little bit, and we don't want to touch on this too much, but just to reiterate this, when they talk about why we don't have man boss, and they're talking about how girl boss is so bad. We don't have man boss because they actually don't need the empowerment. It's not about equity. It's not about, and when they kind of talk about equality, we look at this just more about justice, right? Because when you have equality, you can't take away the systemic issues in the workforce that are there. Giving everyone the same resources doesn't actually improve anything, because women do need that little lift because they have been systemically harmed for centuries. And so kind of moving on to my second point of clash on how they talked about how it harms the feminist movement. So they talked about when we, again, what you provided about the girl boss was just it's an illegal push. That what you talked about is probably a small minority because it's illegal, right? People aren't going to do it because it's illegal. So when we see eligible companies pushing that, and it means that we talked about, it enables performative activism. But okay, say a company wants to be performative. At the end of the day, when they are performative and you're an eligible company, we actually do see even if there's no true motive, we still get promises about like this justice in the workforce, right? We still get these benefits that can come from this, even if it's not a true motive. We don't, like, this is just a first step to getting this, like, workforce similarities. So, like, when we talk about the manipulation of women, they're more likely to be vulnerable when they aren't supported in the mass, rather than, like, not being educated on the empowerment, right? When you're educated in your empowerment, you're actually going to be educated on, like, what is wrong and what is not actually a business, which is what they provided. I will take a point.
If the word boss means to manage people and girl is an adjective to mean girl, how could you interpret it any other way than a girl that's a manager of people in the workplace?
No, we think of boss, right? You can be the manager of your own life. Yes, definition of boss is being a manager. How about you manage your own life rather than feeling you are systemically harmed by everyone else when you feel like everyone else is managing your own life? We think that this is the definition of girl boss, feeling empowered to be yourself in a workforce. And so now I kind of move on to my split point on how the girl boss narrative aims to educate male-dominated workforce. And we see two reasons as to why this is true.
What is my
First, it's outside influence versus internal factors. And so the second is the outreach to STEM workplaces. So we see the first mechanism, kind of as this making it true, is the outside influences versus internal factors. So in a male-dominated workforce, due to the prevalence of males, there is little to no internal knowledge of women's rights, right? So when we have obvious outside influence, like in social media that is pushed, we have better chance of traction within a workforce where males would otherwise really bring it up, right? Because there's no motive to do so. At our worst, we get a conversation when the affirmative team doesn't have any influence to reach this kind of workforce because they have provided no mechanisms as to how they are going to provide a better environment for women. We see nothing in terms of influence or even mention. They have to support that in the fact of this environment with no internal influence, we see nothing to change in these male-dominated workforces. And on to my second reason as to why this is true. So we see the outreach to STEM job areas. So STEM is obviously very male-dominated, with very many young girls afraid to study computer science, engineering, etc. actually due to the lack of support. So this is kind of a more specific area of what I just talked about in male-dominated workforces. When we have an outward influence that supports young girls in STEM, for example, when we see it, like when Mia talked about a schoolgirl starting a club because she thinks, okay, maybe I can be a girl boss of my own life, we see an increase of girls feeling comfortable to enter into STEM. And in the long term, we see more internal support, right, between women, creating a positive cycle. So the affirmative team will just not see this benefit because they, again, not provided any mechanisms as how they will do so towards STEM jobs for women when they take away the influence a young girl about to start that class. So kind of the impacts of both of this.
On that point,
Yes.
how do you respond to the fact that 40% of Auckland Uni engineering admissions are women?
Well, we see this maybe in New Zealand where like women are like more empowered than other countries. But when we look at like on a global scale, this is just fundamentally not true. Like this is one example. It's still 40%, right? But there's still 60% that aren't in this. Like there's still 60% that are male. And like looking at just Auckland, like. When we look at a global scale, there are still people afraid to go into this STEM kind of workforce. And we've seen this on the internet where women have actually felt, okay, I'm one of two people in this class. Boy, who do I go to if I have an issue? We've seen this in the US, we've seen this in England. It's just so prevalent outside of New Zealand. And we can't characterize this to just New Zealand because it is not just an issue for women in New Zealand. So under the negating side, we see at best more women in STEM and more men actually being educated on women's rights. At worst, right, we see one young girl, realizing she doesn't have to give up what she wants to do in her future out there. And we see this benefit as way too large to ignore. And we don't think empowering men, even if we don't change men's mind, we think in changing one girl's mind, we actually get this benefit, and it is too large to ignore because when we don't, we hush feminism in the workforce. Thank you.
Awesome. I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech and will now welcome up to the third speaker from Bay of Plenty, Ella.
What litigating teams try to spin to you today is that the girl boss movement is the exclusive pathway to feminism and success for women. What we tell you on the outside of the house is that successful feminism is giving women genuine platforms to speak about their struggles and not characterizing them as girl bosses and then calling it a day. 2 points of question today. Firstly, how women are impacted by the girl boss narrative, and secondly, how we achieve empowerment for women. Now, what Megan's told us today is that women are empowered through social media and advertising, and a girl boss pushes them to succeed by giving them unity. They tell us that any illegal schemes such as MLMs just simply won't happen because they're illegal and it'll be all fine and dandy. We have 3 responses to that today. Firstly, we tell you that the benefits about social media are actually not mutually exclusive, right? We tell you that Girl Boss is not the only channel for social media and feminism online. This is what Travis has really pushed to you at Second, right? He told you you can still have all this great advertising in classrooms about women's issues. You can have all this stuff online where young girls who are really empowered through Instagram can go on and look at all these different feminine pages. We tell you it's actually probably a lot more limiting to them if we push Girl Boss as the exclusive way of feminism. If we tell them this is the one way to be successful and this is the one way to do feminism, look at this. We think it's probably better that they explore that on their own terms and get empowerment from lots of different channels, right? It's probably a lot greater on our side of the house for the social media benefit, because girls are able to kind of look and express it in their own way, and they're not pushed into the narrative that they have to be entrepreneurial or STEM successes as Meg has tried to tell you. Now, speaking of this, what we tell you is that even if we listen to Meg's point about multi-level marketing schemes being illegal, we tell you that they still happen. We've seen this very predominantly in the girl boss movement overseas. When Meg tried to focus on the New Zealand one being all nice and good because it's illegal here and we've potentially been able to manage it on their side of the house, they entirely ignore the hundreds of thousands of women who have been pulled into this trap by other women. We tell you that this ultimately undermines the ideal of feminism, right? When women are meant to be working together. I'll get onto this later in my case, right? So going back to this MLM suite, right? As Arcadia told you very pointedly at first, these multi-level marketing schemes continue to happen regardless of whether they are illegal or not, regardless of whether the girl boss movement is pointed to be good job opportunities or not. It's because these rich white women use it to be their own girl bosses by indoctrinating others and turning them into huge debt. We tell you this is a really, really bad thing for the feminist movement. It's something we will not stand for. Now, Anna's trying to push to you here that because if we limit it only to the New Zealand sphere, right, it's good for STEM, it's good for girls in New Zealand schools to get into it. We tell you that women in other countries don't actually have this privilege of the girl boss movement, right? We tell you that they either fall victim to these multi-level marketing ways or they don't have the same access to it. I'll go into this later about how this is because the image of girl boss has been really, really tainted. We tell you it's probably better for these women if they engage in feminism in their own sphere, where they can go into on social media, have these things in their classrooms, but not have them under the specific girl boss branding, right? We tell you that all of these benefits can still exist under outside the house. They just don't have to exist under the girl boss narrative, which we've proven to you today is really, really harmful. Now, thirdly, we tell you that at first and second, that women are actually being pitted against each other at girl boss because it creates such a huge competition between you. We tell you that the girl boss narratives mean that women have to fight to get a leg up because not everyone's given these opportunities, right? Girl boss tells you if you want to succeed, you have to really fight, you have to be an entrepreneur, you have to be good. This completely disregards women who maybe they don't want to be in these huge careers. Maybe they're really content with being in a job that's traditionally female. The girl boss movement exiles all of these people. We think that's actually really harmful to the feminist movement. When you just use the feminist movement overall and not the specific girl boss area of it, it's inclusive of all of these people, which is really important to the success of feminism. I'll now take the point.
Is the feminism movement harmed by women aiming for jobs that are predominantly male dominated?
No, of course not. The feminist movement seeks to encourage encourage that. But when girl boss is used as like that channel to do so, these women feel really undermined because when they achieve these successes, right, they're labeled as a girl boss, and then everyone's like, great, that's a day we've achieved feminism because we have a girl boss. They're not actually given these like platforms to speak out. They're not given these platforms to talk about their struggles, to talk about their issues, and say, I'm a woman in this career, here is my actual pathway. Instead, all their male counterparts, who we both agree on both sides that we need to stand up against because we've been oppressed by them, right? Their male counterparts don't really care because they're like, you know what, we're engaging in feminism because we're labeling this woman as a girl boss. We don't really need to let her like give her opinion and have it like talk about how she got there because we have this performative activism. That's really, really harmful. Now let's move on secondly to how we actually achieve empowerment for women. So what we've heard from Ned today is that performative activism is okay, even if it doesn't really achieve any change because maybe people will feel good about it. We think this is incredibly harmful, right? Performative activism is not achieving any of the outcomes that we've agreed we want on both sides of the house. When Ned comes out and tells you that they want good results for women, they want women to be empowered, but then they agree that performative activism when women don't get any change, okay, they ultimately lose this debate. So how do we combat this on the outside of the house? What we tell you firstly, as well as like we tell you performative activism is not alright. Women being given like the girl boss label and being left as a day is absolutely not okay if we want to see like good feminist outcomes for women. What we tell you we should be seeing instead, right? We should be giving women genuine platforms. We tell them we empower them still through social media outcomes, like through like programs in their schools. We tell you that we still empower them through these different channels and encourage them to go into these roles. But we don't do that by giving them a label of the girl boss. We let them do this on their own merit as individual women, not as a giant part of an umbrella term that labels women as one particular thing and not as the people that they're striving to be. We tell you that when the negating team said that this is okay, they ultimately lose the debate because they are not achieving these good empowerment outcomes for women that we seek to achieve. Now, secondly, on this point, when you, like, for example, when you use the girl boss label, you turn it into a huge, like, patronizing laughing stock, right? We literally saw this morning when the move was announced, and a room full of 100 kids started cracking out laughing because nobody takes girl boss seriously. This is incredibly harmful, right? Because of, like, the girl boss narrative being overrun by, like, this performative activism, everyone just thinks, like, you can call anybody a girl boss and that's just cool and it's funny. There's literally a team at this competition with a girl boss match with Sharpie makeup who's, like, trying to be, like, this epitome of female greatness. We tell you this is not the narrative we want for women. It's really narrow and it's actually not helping them to escape the oppression that we want them to escape. What we tell you on our side of the house is we want women to be seen for genuine success. We want them to be uplifted and pushed beyond our umbrella term label that patronizes it and tells them that because they've got to a certain point, that's cool, we don't really care anymore, we're going to go back to our patriarchal systems. This is something we will not stand for under the affirming side of the house. It is why we have undoubtedly won the debate today. Now, for a summary for you, what we've told you is that the girl boss movement is very harmful to feminism. We've told you that by engaging women in these multi-level marketing schemes, you're actually harming them. By telling them that they're girl bosses and then leaving that as enough for feminism, you are ultimately harming the women we are seeking on our side to uplift. That is why we are proud to propose.
Awesome. I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and now welcome up the third speaker from Central North Island, John.
side opposition told us down their line that they think the term girl boss means that every single woman has to become a CEO, has to become an entrepreneur, has to become a businesswoman. They lost this debate because they fundamentally misunderstood and grossly mischaracterized what the girl boss movement is about. We told you the girl boss movement is about empowering women and actively uplifting women to get the best results for them in their workplaces. That's why we're going to win this debate. Two clashes to the House today. Firstly, who gets the best impacts on women's quality of life, and then secondly, who has a more inclusive feminism movement overall. So firstly, on this clash about who best impacts the women's quality of life. Note here, we think this is the most important thing in this debate. We think this is sufficient debate-winning material, because if we can adequately prove that we get better outcomes for the quality of life of women and we materially improve their lives, we win, because women are just a really, really vulnerable group in this debate. Firstly, they told us, at first, they gave us the substantive about how the girl boss movement manipulates vulnerable women. They gave us all these things about how they're capitalized by sexism, it's financially disadvantages them, they thinking they're a businesswoman, and it's harmful from a really rich white woman pyramid scheme. But it was ultimately all about how we manipulate women into becoming financially disadvantaged.
On that
Firstly, girl boss helps them to get into businesses, to get into STEM, that these male industries that have been dominated by males for so long. We don't think that's a bad thing. We think that it's really good that women are actively able to do this and they're actively uplifted. They had no response to any of our mechanisms we brought to you at NZIER about how having this network, this platform of women that are girl bosses, it'll actively empower women. This looks like strong STEM clubs in schools. It looks like the inclusive nature of uplifting women. They then came back at this and said all girls want to be bosses, their own bosses, and it's really, really harmful. Quite frankly, we think this is quite a short-sighted response, because yes, the word boss means you're your own manager, but we don't think, as Bridget said, it's the manager of your own life. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the CEO of a company. We still think girls and women can be girl bosses in other facets. We just don't think that it has to be all CEOs, and we think that's a fundamental understanding within the girl boss movement. The girl boss movement is about empowering women to have aspirations to high-paying jobs. We think that's really, really important. There is a current, really bad gender pay gap, and we want to do everything we can to decrease this. They said that it's bad that women have to aspire to goals that they're not going to achieve. It's going to be really, really bad for them. We don't think it's more bad for women to aspire to be leaders. They go, no mechanisms as to how it's really, really bad for women to aspire to high-paying jobs. They just assert that it is. We think that at the point you have more women aspiring for higher-paying jobs, more women getting educated, more women aspiring to a better quality of life, we don't see how there's any negative impacts there. They then told us that the girl boss movement isn't accessible because of online infographics, and it's not widely circulated because the super rich women that have it. The fact is, women are always going to be benefited from this conversation, from this discourse. Even if we take them at their best, we still think we get discourse, and it's a unique benefit to outside of the house that we think is really, really important. But we tell you, the girl boss movement doesn't look like this mischaracterization of not getting it widely circulated. We tell you it looks like not-for-profit organizations going into schools and running coding programs to benefit these girls. It looks like campaigns on social media to inspire young girls to actually aspire for high-paying jobs. Now moving on to their side of the house. They gave us no characterization of how women are going to be benefited on their side of the house. They gave us no mechanisms as to how they're going to be benefited in society. On that point, didn't necessarily have to stand for women being completely disproportionately disadvantaged with the pay gap, completely horrifically oppressed. They tell you we live in a meritocratic society where we live in a brutal meritocracy where the way you get high-paying jobs is just off your merit. But the current status quo, the reason we don't have a boy boss movement is because that is the nature of society. We say men are just inherently more at a more advantageous position. Note that we never conceded that progressive activism was going on its own. We told you we brought you so much material as to how we actually uplift women, which they had no response to. At the end of this point, we significantly impact the women that are so important in this debate. We uplift women and we give them aspirations for their futures. I'll take a POI here as well.
You say the only harm on your side is no women see it, well, the goal movement had 99% women to death, because even if M&M's made it legal in some places, in fact, they're mostly illegal in most places, but they're poorly regulated because it's really easy to bypass these laws. So what do you say to 99% of people being put into debt because of the girl boss movement?
Okay, like you say women are put into debt because of the girl boss movement, and like these rich white women are making them being put into debt. But we just don't think, like, you gave an example of like people selling their makeup to be more of a girl boss. We just don't think that many women are going to sell their makeup and it's going to materially impact them really, really detrimentally, like we wanted to tell you. We tell you even if people are like financially disadvantaged, we tell you that disadvantage is going to be greatly benefited by the fact they're aspiring for higher paying jobs and there's more awareness and we have more discourse about this that's inherently going to make them more access to this employment. Now moving on to who has a more inclusive feminism movement. Because they try to tell us that we harm feminism in two ways. They try to tell us that women aren't going to be taken seriously in the corporate world because of the girl boss movement and it harms feminism. They gave the example of like the Canterbury team mascot, which we quite frankly don't really think is relevant. We tell you in meritocracy, you're never going to get the tangible benefits of a girl boss if you just do nothing. We live in a misogynistic society in a disproportionately overpowering in workplaces at the point that we do get like this discourse. We think that's really, really important. But secondly, all movements like kind of have some people that criticize them and don't take it seriously. There were literally memes about COVID and that COVID was a hoax. There were memes about George Floyd's death. We tell you this is completely sunk harm. The whole thing about like, women not being taken seriously and harming feminism is just not something that's mutually exclusive to either side. They then try to tell us that the girl boss movement pits women against women and is going to internally harm the feminist movement. We tell you women are going to be competing for jobs that are disproportionately male dominated. We tell you they're never going to be like trying to tear down other women and like trying to compete with women. Yeah, they're going to be competing with women, but they're also, because of the nature of a girl boss, they're going to be trying to uplift those women with them as well. You're never going to have women like trying to outdo each other really, really negatively. They're always going to want to outdo the men, and we think that's a beneficial impact on our side of the house. At the end of this debate, we significantly improve the women's quality of life. We have a more inclusive feminism movement, and we don't tangibly harm the lives of women. We're incredibly proud to oppose.
Awesome. I'd like to thank the speaker for their speech and will now welcome up the negating reply delivered by NZIER.
When F told us today that telling women to be strong in the workforce have encouraged themselves to pursue opportunities that have been denied to them, had to be dismissed because it was too much pressure for them, and that we just had to get it any other way, or that bringing women into a global network was a pyramid scheme, or when they just asserted that with no mechanism, that we just suddenly get females feeling empowered when we don't offer them the exclusive opportunities that girl wants us, we tell them that they lost their case. Know that when we asked them in a POI what they were actually going to do, what these platforms actually looked like that they told us they were going to do, we never got a response to. When we tell you we give opportunities that looks like cogent networks of women coming together through organisations such as the Girl Boss Movement in New Zealand, going to low decile schools and running coding programs and initiatives there, going to businesses and asserting like infographics and information in these and disseminating in that workforce, that's the cohesion and the opportunity that has been denied for women for so long. Two main points of clash in our debate today. Firstly, what actually happens to the opportunity provided to women, and secondly, who supports the integrity of the feminist movement. Let's look at this first point of clash on the opportunity of women. We had three main thrusts by the affirmative side of the house. So first one of this was that we had to operate on women's own networks, and some platforms that we never really got clarification for what they were just going to work. We tell you that we actually get really beneficial short-term buoyancy for long-term gain that wasn't responded to. We tell that things like girl boss, because they're largely disseminated in social media, it's really easily comprehensible, and it's far more accessible and viewable to young girls and to people in the workplace. That's what gives you the courage and the morale to keep these things like legislative that just take years and years, also really important, but to actually get the feminist movement to a really high status that people are going to take seriously, you need support. That's a really great thing to have on our side of the house that we just tell you wasn't adequately responded to at all side out. But secondly, we just had this massive mischaracterization that the girl boss movement centers only on CEOs and only on STEM-focused platforms. Firstly, we told you this was just a massive mischaracterization. I'm not going to spend too long on this. But also, we just tell you that we actually think it's a great idea if girl boss focuses on things like STEM, on things like tech and entrepreneurship, because that's where there's been a massive drop in female employment. Things like businesses, and that's where women are dangerously disproportionately affected. We tell you it's far better that we actually get buy-in in these areas because it wasn't going to happen anywhere else. We tell you women are largely supported in other areas, but it's far more important to focus our directives on places that we were never going to get from any other organisation. But thirdly, on bad pressure, and that we just had to do this organically. First of all, we just tell you there's no organic solution. We both agree that women are really vulnerable in the debate. We tell you that things like empowerment and support, things like messaging people that you can be your own boss and own your own narrative, that was a far better alternative than telling women that they could never get these opportunities given them by other networks. Because we just think it's completely unrealistic that things like Spark and Tessa are suddenly going to start offering business internships to women. What we tell you is things like the Girl Boss Company New Zealand approaching these networks and giving them to women was always going to be the far better alternative to actually giving women an opportunity. And secondly, on the integrity of the feminist movement, we sort of had this idea that it was not going to be taken seriously. Look, we think it's okay if we get a few memes taken out of the girl boss movement, if even just one girl feels she has the external support to start a STEM club at her school, go into a STEM focused career because she knows that that's going to be supported by. We tell you that's a self-harm, and we tell you we get better access to people who couldn't digest and access the feminist movement in the first place. We tell you we're not here on both sides of the house. We're here to provide females with the support and the system that they've been far too long forgotten about. We tell them that we can't hold them to stagnancy by policy. We tell you that we gained a short-term support that was consistently failed by side affirmative, and they just try to claim our benefits of information which we tell you occurs on our side of the house. We're happy to stand up feminist groups that don't aim entirely engage with entrenched masculine power structures. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the speaker for this speech, and will now welcome up the final speech of the debate today, the affirmative reply delivered by Travis.
A huge part of this debate today has come down to what actually is girl boss in the real world. The affirmative team has told you in no unclear terms that it is mostly hijacked by MLMs, and by its very definition encourages women to be the boss. They say that it also encourages women to be the boss of their own lives, but if we could misinterpret that, I think a lot of people would too on their grounds. Look, they also say that it's about women standing up and making their own decisions, but we tell you that there are better ways of doing that through campaigns about women's rights and making sure that they are better stood up against in the workplace, as we have so clearly said to you today. Look, under their side of the house, they have said that Girl Boss is some kind of non-profit organisation. They have done this too assertively. They've provided no backups and no examples. They just say it exists. We've provided clear examples of MLMs and groups that hijack the Girl Boss narrative to manipulate innocent and harm women. Look, they also said that MLMs are illegal, but they're not. Pyramid schemes are, but MLMs are not. Pyramid schemes are very similar. Selling pants to women is not illegal. Come on, this is crazy. Look, so because we've actually shown to you today, panel, that Girl Boss is not a term that is so wonderfully used by everyone and it's benevolent. And by the way, if it was such a great term, why do famous people like Jacinda Ardern, Deborah Meaden, and Theresa Gutton detest it? Why do they not use it? If it was what got them their success, they would be the girl boss woman, but they are not. They're the anti-girl boss woman. So I don't understand how that works. Look, now that we've shown to you today, we have shown to you today that that's what girl boss is about. And we can more, and because of that, we can clearly explain our harms and their benefits that they say are extremely mitigated. Look, it emotionally manipulates women because they feel that it's their only path to success, it's their only way forward. Instead of being involved in programs like STEM, they must run the companies and they must invest tons of money in risky businesses. That we see that actually you target desperate women. Look, they have said that it's helped women. They say it's helped women because they can get into STEM programs in schools. We tell you this is wrong, not only because they've mischaracterized how it is used in schools, but we tell you that in the past, STEM has become more accessible by encouraging women and treating them better in the classroom. Instead of saying, wow, girl boss, we say, oh, awesome, come into our physics class and do that. Don't go into cooking, don't do economics, you can do whatever you want. That's not girl boss, that's just being blatant. We need to treat girls, women like adults and not try and euphemize words to them. Yeah, it's true. Now, they've also not characterized actually how girl boss and how girl boss works on a psychological level. We've explained repeatedly that girl boss is about driving force, it's about running. It's about unhealthy competitiveness. They say it's just about, oh, I'm going to be the boss of my own boss. No one connotates it that way. No one in schools does it, and the way it's used is like that. I repeated that many times, and I will say it again for our case. Look, if we believe their side of the house at their best, that girl boss has made some tangible difference in schools and stuff, we tell you this still has completely unavoidable and completely unacceptable harms. If some girls are believe it's possible or not, we still see thousands of women put in debt and are being manipulated by equity companies. They know that they can use this apparently amazing, effective term. Look, on our side of the house, we can see and we have seen doors opened to women in STEM, and we've seen doors open to women because they just believe that they can do it. They are not put down. That's why we have 40% women in engineering at Auckland. And on that, they say that, oh, it's only relevant to Auckland, and they say that it hasn't helped here. But we tell you that actually it's not relevant because they sometimes say now it's a global issue, but we can see girl boss more privilege around the world, and somehow that isn't helped. So they haven't responded to that properly. Look, let's treat women like adults instead of dolls with Sharpie on their eyes. Because girls need to be told that they can do it and not turned and fetishized into some character of being a superhero. Because girls are people, not characters. Thank you.
Awesome. I'd like to thank both teams for an excellent debate, and I'm just going to stop the live stream.
Yeah.
Yeah.